In this lesson, I thought we'd just take a look at what's going on in the software a bit more, even though everything we've done is entirely possible by forgetting the computer's even there, thanks to the Mark III's awesome displays. However, if we take a look at the software now, we can see the last pattern we created and all of the events in it here, on each of the pads. And if I click the arrow here, we can see what's shown on the pads when we press the pattern button on the hardware. And the patterns can be selected from the software in the same way as on the hardware by just clicking on them. One thing you can do a little more easily from the software though is move these patterns around and rename them. And even colour them differently if you want to, using the right-click menu. And all the event editing that we've been doing so far on the hardware can of course be done easily in the software too, where we can move any notes around by dragging like so. And to change the velocity of a note, you just select the pad with the event on, and then you can adjust the bar like so. If incidentally you're not seeing the bars here, you just need to make sure the control lane is visible by clicking the switch here, and also that it's in MIDI, not modulation view. Furthermore, if you want to move a note with a finer resolution than the grid allows, as it's moving in steps here, which are 16ths currently, then you can either change the grid resolution in the bottom corner, or turn it off completely with the switch alongside. And a shortcut to this is to hold down the Command key on a Mac, so presumably the Control key on a PC. In fact, I would recommend doing it this way generally, as turning off the grid means that quantizing won't work, of course. So as a beginner, it's an easy thing to leave the grid off, and then not understand why your notes aren't quantizing. What I'll do now though, is show you a sort of hybrid way of working with the hardware and software, so you can see a slightly different way of doing things. Although I typically encourage working with just the hardware as much as you can, so you don't get overly reliant on the mouse when it's not necessary and ultimately less fun. In any case, let's create a new pattern now from the hardware, but instead of it just being a new one, I'll duplicate the last pattern we made and then make some changes to it. To do this, in pattern mode, I just hold down the duplicate button, then hit the pattern I want to copy, followed by an empty pattern slot. And now we have two identical patterns here. So for this new one, so I can hear what it's like without certain drums playing, I can mute them either by holding down the mute button on the hardware and then hitting different pads, or from the software, I can just click on the numbered buttons, with right-clicking, soloing each one. So it makes a difference whether you click on the name, which selects a pad, or number, which mutes it. I'm wanting to get rid of the kick and closed hat from the pattern then, on pads 1 and 3. So I can either use the hardware technique from before, where I hold down Erase, and then Events, and then hit those pads, which is probably the quickest. Or from the software, I can click, hold and drag the mouse over Events to select them, and then hit Delete on the keyboard. Or, as right-clicking an event deletes it, I can just right-click one event when lots are selected, and they all get deleted. So if wanting to delete a lot of events when working in this way, the mouse can sometimes be quicker. Okay, so now I want to record in some events for pad 8. So with Record Quantize off in the settings, I'll hit Shift and Record and play it in. As I recorded that without the metronome on, the timing drifted out a bit. I don't mind it being a bit loose at the start, but I might improve the timing of these last two a bit, which I can do quickly from the software by selecting just them, and then right-clicking the grid and choosing one of the quantize options. I'll go for 50%. Now if we wanted to add some notes for this side stick here, which has some nice delay on it, so it could be good for a breakdown, I might just want to quickly draw them in, which you can do with the pencil tool here. And clicking on notes again erases them. But I find it easier to stay on pointer mode and just double-click the grid where I want an event, and right-click to erase, as we've seen already. However, one situation where the pencil is useful is when creating or editing lots of events quickly. For example, if I want to create a fast run of notes for the tambourine on pad 16, I can first make sure the grid is set to the speed I want the notes to be at, and then, using the pencil tool, just drag along the grid. Then if I wanted to edit the velocities of these events, I can stay in pencil mode and drag up and down on the bars like so. And I might also bring the levels of the shaker down. So it's a pretty quick way of editing lots of event velocities. And I'll name this last pattern Lesson 3 Break. And now I can jam with all 3 patterns by hitting play and then jumping from one pattern to the next. So you should now be starting to have a pretty good understanding about some of the different ways you can create and jam with patterns in Maschine. Next time, we'll be looking at sound slots by creating our own kit. See you then.